The alien fleet cut through the silence of the void with the confidence of predators who had forgotten the meaning of prey. Their ships, black-veined leviathans rimmed in violet light, drifted in formation toward the human colony of Caliban's Reach. From a flagship's observation deck, High Admiral Saraxis reclined his command chair, as though presiding over a dull ceremony rather than an invasion. His clawed fingers tapped idly on the armrest. "Another cluster of dirt scrapers," he murmured, voice low and resonant, meant for no one in particular. The bridge crew chuckled cautiously at his words. "One wonders how far these mammals believe they can crawl before we crush them back into their cradle." Captain Vor, his second-in-command, leaned forward. Unlike Saraxis, he wore unease in every line of his frame. His carapace plates flexed, signaling agitation. "With respect, High Admiral, the humans adapt quickly. Too quickly. Their colonies multiply like spores, and their vessels, though crude, already show patterns of tactical learning. I would advise restraint." Saraxis turned his head slightly, the faint glow of the nebula reflecting in his reptilian eyes. "Restraint? Against vermin who fling iron rods into the void and call a fleet? Captain, you mistake irritation for danger. They learn, yes, but so does a wounded animal before it dies. Watch closely, and you will see how little their progress matters." The Admiral gestured lazily toward the tactical display. Below, Caliban's Reach glittered faintly against its desert moon. The colony's defenses barely registered, satellite relays, a handful of fusion cannons, and a scattering of corvettes braced like frightened insects before the storm. The fleet advanced. On the planet's surface, alarms had begun to scream through narrow streets of steel and sand. Colonel Arya Vance stood on the roof of the command bastion, visor raised against the glare of descending fire. The civilian evacuation convoys were already in motion, their engines thundering toward underground shelters carved into the moon's crust. She adjusted her comms link, steadying her tone as she broadcast to the orbital defense network. "All batteries maintain position. Keep signals traffic minimal. Do not provoke them until my command." Her voice did not betray it, but she felt the tightness in her chest, the gnawing truth that she was about to watch men and women die in droves. Against the Empire's armada, their defenses were ornamental, meant to buy time, not hope. And yet, deep below the surface, the real game was unfolding. Saraxis's fleet entered low orbit, dropping formation like a predator's jaw unhinging before the kill. Plasma lances streaked from their bow cannons, striking defense satellites and splitting them apart in arcs of white fire. Human corvettes scattered, some shredded instantly, others spiraling in desperate evasive runs. The Admiral watched it all with the indulgent smile of a seasoned executioner. "Pathetic," he said softly. But Vor's eyes narrowed. Something unsettled him. The corvettes weren't fleeing at random. Their paths arced deliberately, curving outward into space like a shepherd's hook. "High Admiral," he said cautiously, "their withdrawal patterns, they're herding us closer to the planetary axis." "This is—" "Coincidence," Saraxis interrupted, his voice sharp with annoyance. "Do not imagine cunning where none exists." Still, Vor's mandibles clicked in quiet disapproval. He had studied human broadcasts before they were banned. He had watched grainy reels of their wars, mud and fire, men charging into metal storms, entire cities burned only to rise again. These were not creatures who blundered endlessly. They adapted like a virus. On Caliban's Reach, Arya Vance exhaled slowly. The alien fleet was now precisely where she needed them. Hidden beneath the moon's surface, within silos camouflaged by geological noise, waited the true teeth of the colony. Not outdated fusion cannons, not corvette swarms, but magnetic rail batteries the size of mountains, silent until this moment. She gave the order with quiet steel. "Fire!" The first shot tore through the void like the judgment of a silent god. A tungsten slug accelerated to a fraction of light speed, sheared across space, and slammed into the flank of Saraxis's flagship. The impact ripped open decks, atmosphere venting into the void, alien bodies scattering like sparks from a forge. The bridge shook, alarm shrieking. Before Saraxis could bark a command, a second slug hit the cruiser to port, folding its spine and shattering it into drifting halves. A third pierced the battleship above, its shields useless against raw kinetic velocity. In the span of 10 heartbeats, 3 warships had been gutted. The Admiral's smile was gone. Vor gripped the railing. His voice was low, horrified. "They baited us." On the human comnet, a calm voice, unshaken, almost dispassionate, cut across the void. "Attention, hostile fleet. You have trespassed into protected territory. You will not be permitted to leave. Cease movement and surrender. This is your only warning." The alien bridge fell silent. The voice had carried no desperation, no trace of pleading. Only certainty. Saraxis rose from his chair, mandibles bared. Empty bravado. Primitive theatrics. They struck lucky with hidden guns. They cannot. Another railgun shot screamed across the void, narrowly missing the flagship but annihilating a destroyer directly behind it. Saraxis stopped mid-sentence. Vor turned toward him slowly. "High Admiral, this is not luck." Below, Arya Vance lowered her comms receiver, face unreadable. Her soldiers waited for her reaction, for the trembling relief of a commander whose gamble had paid off. But her expression was cold, set in stone. She knew this was not a victory, only the opening of a door humanity had kept closed for too long. The aliens had wanted a culling. Instead, they had stumbled into approving ground. On the flagship, Saraxis felt the first flicker of unease in a career of endless dominance. He glanced again at the tactical display, now bleeding red with the icons of fallen ships. Vor's words gnawed at him, unwelcome truths rising from the depths of memory. The humans adapt quickly. Too quickly. Another railgun fired. The fleet shuddered as reality rearranged itself around them, as the certainty of power began to fracture. Saraxis's claws dug into the armrest until cracks formed in the metal. His voice, once dripping with disdain, came out harsh and uncertain. "Prepare for counterattack." But in the stillness after his command, even he could feel it, the balance had shifted. The hunters had stepped into a snare, and the prey was no longer running. And somewhere in the quiet heart of him, the Admiral understood, this was only the beginning. The wreckage of 3 alien warships still smoldered in orbit when silence pressed itself over the bridge of the flagship. Shards of twisted alloy spun in the void, their jagged trails glittering faintly as if mocking the Empire's invincible reputation. High Admiral Saraxis gripped the railing, mandibles clenched tight, while his crew avoided his gaze as though their lives depended on it. Perhaps they did. Captain Vor was the first to speak. His voice was low, steady, though his inner plates tremored. "Their rail cannons are not mere fortifications. They were concealed deliberately, waiting for us. This is no provincial defense. This is strategy." Saraxis's eyes flared, cold and burning. A trick. A single system cannot undo centuries of supremacy. He forced the words out, but they lacked their usual gravity. Even he could hear the thinness beneath them. The human voice returned across the comms, the same calm officer as before. "You will receive no further warnings. Cease hostilities. You are in violation of human sovereign space." Every syllable struck with deliberate weight. There was no fear, no bluster, just the quiet certainty of one who had already decided the outcome. Vor felt it settle like a stone in his chest. The humans weren't trying to intimidate. They were informing. "Cut their channel," Saraxis snapped, more sharply than intended. But the damage had been done. His crew shifted uneasily, their claws clicking over consoles, their silence more telling than protest. Confidence, once unshakable, had thinned to a fragile skin stretched over doubt. Far below, Colonel Arya Vance watched the tactical readouts as more slugs were chambered into the rail batteries. Her soldiers around her whispered of impossible luck, of gods waking on their side. She silenced them with a glance. This was not luck. This was the culmination of years of brutal planning, of sleepless nights where humanity played meat for the galaxy's predators while sharpening weapons in the dark. She allowed herself a single breath of satisfaction, then buried it. The aliens would not retreat after a single blow. Empires never did. Another volley tore through the sky. 2 more enemy destroyers were impaled, their reactors flaring like novas as they ruptured. Human corvettes, previously scattering like prey, wheeled around suddenly, their formation crisp and unified. With suicidal precision, they darted between crippled cruisers, unleashing point-blank salvos into ruptured hulls. What had looked like flight had become entrapment. On the alien flagship, the air grew heavy with smoke and tension. Saraxis barked orders to regroup, but every command sounded reactive, defensive. For the first time in his long career, he was not dictating the flow of battle, he was chasing it. "High Admiral," Vor said carefully, "this colony was never meant to be taken. It was meant to test us, to measure us." His eyes flicked to the display, then back to Saraxis. They are not defending. They are revealing. The admiral hissed, his pride wounded deeper than any ship's hull. You will not speak treachery on my bridge, Captain. These creatures. But the words withered before he could finish. Another human broadcast cut through, but this time it was no warning. It was a feed. Grainy images flickered across the tactical holos, human wars, past and recent, pulled from archived transmissions. Cities engulfed in firestorms. Trenches of mud and bone. Mushroom clouds blooming over oceans. Precision drone strikes in deserts. Whole populations screaming, resisting, enduring. The bridge fell silent, transfixed by the brutality. Even Saraxis could not look away. The humans were showing them their history not as threat, but as reminder. This was not their first war. It was simply their next. Vor's mandibles twitched. They have been tempered by this. Every war, every atrocity, forged them into something we have not understood. He looked at his commander, voice hardening. We have mistaken silence for weakness. It was preparation. For the first time, Saraxis could not dismiss him. His throat tightened with a sensation he had never known in combat, unease. On Caliban's reach, Arya Vance allowed the transmission to run its course. She knew the aliens would see what they needed to see, that humanity's capacity for violence was not invention, but inheritance. Her face, lit by the glow of burning ships above, betrayed no triumph. This was not victory, only revelation. The battle's tide had shifted irrevocably. Alien formations collapsed inward, scrambling to regroup, their once perfect geometry reduced to fractured clusters. Human corvettes pressed the assault, guided not by desperation, but by doctrine as old as their species. Hit where it hurts, retreat where it's hopeless, and never stop moving until the enemy breaks. Yet Arya did not exult. She had studied the Empire's size, its reach across stars. This was a single engagement, one world, in a vast ocean. But she also knew the truth the aliens were only beginning to taste. Humanity had more than railguns hidden in their arsenal. This was the opening chord of a symphony no one had yet heard. On the flagship, Saraxis's breathing grew ragged. He tried to summon his old contempt, to frame this as a fluke, an anomaly. But the images of those human wars still burned in his mind, the relentless cycle of destruction and rebirth, the defiance even in annihilation. He had laughed at them once. Now the laughter had curdled. "High Admiral," Vor said again, softer now, "but steady, we must withdraw. If we linger, they will bleed us dry. And this is only one colony. Imagine what waits at their core." The words scraped against Saraxis's pride, but beneath the fury and denial something colder stirred, the awareness that his captain might be right. The prey he had mocked had sprung its trap, and the teeth were sharper than any doctrine had predicted. He looked out at the burning wreckage, the twisted remains of ships that had once carried the weight of his empire's arrogance. His silence lasted long enough for the bridge crew to feel the weight of it pressing into their shells. Finally he spoke, his voice lower than a whisper, but heavy as stone. "Signal the fleet. Defensive formation. Prepare for retreat." The admission tasted like ash in his mouth, but the alternative tasted worse. Far below, Arya Vance received the encrypted data that confirmed what she had expected. The alien fleet was breaking away. Not destroyed, not annihilated, but wounded, and more importantly, afraid. She lowered her visor, the reflection of distant fire painting her expression in shifting light. Her soldiers cheered in the bunkers and control rooms, but she did not. She knew this was not an end. It was an invitation. The Empire would not let this humiliation stand. And when they came back, it would be with the full weight of their armadas. For now, humanity had bought more than survival. They had bought attention. And in the quiet after the cheers, Arya allowed herself the smallest, most dangerous thought, perhaps that had been the plan all along. The Empire's retreat from Caliban's reach echoed like a wound through its territories. Entire sectors had whispered of the battle, first with disbelief, then with fear. The invincible had bled. On the flagship Variktha's Pride, Admiral Saraxis stood before the War Council's projection chamber, his claws folded behind him as he faced the assembled figures of the Empire's ruling hierarchy. Their forms, towering and draped in ceremonial alloys, flickered with the distortion of distance, but their scorn was sharp enough to pierce any veil. "You withdrew," one of the counselors hissed, their voice a chorus of grinding tones. "From primitives." Saraxis's jaw flexed. "I preserved the fleet. To remain would have been annihilation. Their defenses were not luck. They have planned for us." Laughter cut through the chamber. Bitter, incredulous. Another counselor sneered. Railguns and crude projectiles? They scrape stone and call it strategy. You humiliate us with excuses. But Vor spoke then, breaking protocol with a calm as deliberate as any strike. Counselors, with respect, you did not see what we saw. Their weapons pierced our shields as though they were air. Their tactics mirrored our maneuvers, predicted them even. These humans are not primitives. They are predators who have been waiting. The silence that followed was colder than scorn. Some faces flickered uneasily, but most radiated the arrogance of centuries. Saraxis saw it for what it was, denial. The Empire had never known a rival. To admit one existed was to admit fragility. You will strike again, the Council decreed. With full force. You will crush this illusion of strength and scatter their ashes. The projection dissolved, leaving Saraxis in shadow. Vor turned to him, mandibles tight. They do not understand. They will, Saraxis said, though his voice lacked conviction. His thoughts were already spiraling, not toward strategy, but toward the images the humans had broadcast. The wars, the firestorms, the endless cycle of destruction and rebirth. He had tried to dismiss it as propaganda, yet it lingered. No race flaunted its own scars unless those scars had become weapons. Meanwhile, in Earth's deep command networks buried beneath the Pacific, Colonel Arya Vance stood among her peers before a wall of shifting tactical data. The victory at Caliban's Reach had not been celebrated here, not beyond a nod, and the tightening of jaws. Humanity had no illusions about the Empire's pride. Retaliation was not a question, it was a certainty. Her superior, General Keating, spoke with the same dispassion as the human officer who had issued the warning in battle. Phase 2 is authorized. Relay nodes will be activated. Fleet deployments remain classified even among our own. We keep them guessing. Arya inclined her head. And if they escalate to full war? They will, Keating replied. And when they do, we will show them the second step. Railguns had been the opening note. What followed would be far stranger. Beyond human space, the Empire gathered. Entire fleets were recalled from border patrols, from subjugated colonies, from ceremonial processions meant to terrify lesser races. Shipyards worked without pause, forging armaments in anticipation of a campaign that would reassert dominion. Yet for all the noise and fire, Saraxis could sense the cracks spreading. Officers whispered when they thought he did not hear. Soldiers stared too long at holos of human battles. Doubt had crept in, and once it crept in, it grew like rot. In private, Vor confronted him again. They will not fight us on our terms. That is the lesson you refuse to voice. They will fight everywhere, anywhere, until we exhaust ourselves. Saraxis's claws flexed. You would have us cower before them. I would have us respect them, Vor said, and his tone was the heavier for its lack of heat. We thought them children. They are not. They are wolves dressed as lambs. For a long moment, Saraxis said nothing. Pride wrestled with truth in his chest, grinding against one another, like tectonic plates. He wanted to sneer, to dismiss, to laugh as the council did. But when he closed his eyes, he saw again the instant his fleet had been gutted by invisible cannons, the calm human voice delivering not a threat, but a certainty. You will not be permitted to leave. He had not been mocked like that in all his years. Not by words, by reality. When the Empire's second offensive began, it was with all the weight of tradition. Dozens of fleets surged into human sectors, filling the void with a storm of violet light. Worlds were blockaded, moons besieged, space lanes flooded with warships. It was supposed to be overwhelming, absolute. It was anything but. Human fleets did not meet them head-on. They struck in shadows, appearing from nowhere, tearing into supply chains before vanishing. Alien dreadnoughts lumbered forward only to find themselves abandoned, starved of support, their comms jammed by unseen hands. Rail slugs whispered across the void from impossible distances, carving holes in ships that never glimpsed their attackers. And then came the impossible. Fleets of human warships began to appear in places they could not have reached. A moon under siege one moment was suddenly flanked by destroyers that had been light years away hours before. A convoy underguard found itself surrounded by vessels that had simply arrived inside their formation, as though space itself had betrayed them. Teleportation. The word hissed like a curse in Saraxis's mind when the reports reached him. Humanity had not simply refined the old arts of war. They had leapt into something the Empire's greatest engineers had dismissed as fantasy. On the bridge, Vor whispered the thought aloud, almost to himself. Railguns first, teleporters later. Cyaxares' claws gouged the railing, his chest tight with rage and dread. Each report was a blade in his pride, but beneath it, something deeper stirred. A hollow recognition. The humans had revealed only what they chose when they chose. He realized, too late, that he had been dancing to their tempo since the first shot fired at Caliban's reach. In the void outside his flagship, another fleet disintegrated under human precision. He watched the tactical display, the icons of his ships winking out one by one, and knew the truth that no counselor would admit. The Empire was not fighting to win. It was fighting not to understand how badly it ached. The Empire's war machine fractured like glass under too much pressure. What began as scattered rumors of human resistance had become undeniable fact. Fleets sent to crush Earth vanished into silence. Colonies fell not to fire, but to precision strikes, and supply lines dissolved as if cut by invisible blades. For every dozen warships launched, half returned, battered, haunted, whispering of battles where they never even saw their enemy until it was already too late. High Admiral Cyaxares had once stood at the apex of galactic power. Now he stood in the ruins of certainty, watching holograms of his empire's fleets burn. Around him, the bridge crew moved in stunned obedience, their bodies rigid, their gazes lowered. The air tasted of smoke and defeat. War approached quietly, as though breaking a spell. It spreads faster than the Council can deny. Governors flee their posts. Border races rise against us, emboldened by human advances. This is not war anymore, Admiral. This is collapse. Cyaxares' mandibles clicked, a sharp sound in the silence. The Empire has stood for 10,000 cycles. It cannot fall to... He stopped. The words felt brittle, like bones pressed into dust. He remembered Caliban's reach, the first blow, the certainty in that human voice. You will not be permitted to leave. He had dismissed it as arrogance. Now, with fleets unraveling and rebellions igniting, he heard it again, no arrogance, only inevitability. Then what are they? Cyaxares asked at last, his voice frayed. Vor met his gaze steadily. What we feared least and understood least. Survivors who learned how to turn survival into strategy. Cyaxares turned to the display. A new red swath carved itself across the star maps, human advances striking not with conquest, but with surgical efficiency, cutting deep into the Empire's arteries. Worlds were not raised, but occupied. Populations were not enslaved, but ordered. The humans moved with the terrifying calm of surgeons dissecting a giant. On Earth, in the command chamber beneath oceans, Arya Vance stood before her peers as reports streamed in. One by one, empires that had watched humanity with condescension now watched in fear. The Council of Generals and Strategists had fallen silent, listening to the tally of victories without cheers, without triumph. It felt less like victory, and more like awakening from a long, dangerous sleep. They are breaking, General Keating said, his face pale against the glow of the screens. But the question remains, do we end them completely, or do we stop? Arya spoke, her tone steady, but weighed with something heavier than pride. Annihilation was never our goal. We needed them to understand we would not be prey. That lesson has been written in fire. To erase them entirely would make us the monsters they feared us to be. Keating studied her carefully. Mercy after all this. Not mercy, she replied. Control. If they survive under our terms, the galaxy sees discipline, not madness. We will rule by the restraint they never imagined we had. Her words were carried outward, encoded, transmitted, and intercepted. Hours later, they reached the flagship of Cyaxares. The message was brief, spoken in that same calm, unshaken tone that had haunted him since the first volley. You may surrender your fleets and worlds. You will be given governance under our oversight. Resist further, and we will not restrain ourselves again. This is not vengeance. This is order. The bridge crew froze as the words ended. They sounded less like a demand and more like a law of nature, unchangeable, inevitable. Vor exhaled slowly. They offer us survival, Admiral. Not as conquerors would, but as those who intend to remain. Cyaxares felt the walls of his pride closing in. To surrender was humiliation beyond measure. Yet to fight was suicide and worse, to damn his people to extinction. He thought of his counselors, still howling in denial even as their palaces trembled. He thought of his soldiers, tired, haunted, eyes hollowed by unseen enemies. He thought of himself, staring down at a map where red lines crept like veins through the Empire's heart. At last he spoke. His voice was low, as though carved from stone. "Signal the humans. Tell them," the words caught in his throat, burned, then forced themselves free. "Tell them we will submit to their terms." The silence that followed was heavy, but not despairing. It was release. The crew did not cheer, but their shoulders eased, their breaths steadied. They had been waiting for this moment, though none dared admit it. Vor bowed his head, not in mockery, but in respect. "History will remember this day, Admiral. Not as our fall, but as the day we finally recognized what we faced." For a long time Saraxis did not answer. His eyes stayed fixed on the stars, on the scattered wreckage of ships that once defined dominance. He wondered what it meant that humanity had chosen restraint. Was it nobility or strategy more cunning than any warlord could conceive? Did they offer survival because they were merciful, or because a surviving enemy was more useful than a dead one? In the depths of his mind, he realized it did not matter. The galaxy itself would never be the same. Arya Vance watched from her own command center as confirmation arrived. The Empire's fleets were standing down, their admiral himself transmitting surrender. She did not smile. Victory felt less like triumph and more like a burden settled across her shoulders. Humanity had been forced to reveal itself, and now there was no return to shadows. When she looked around the chamber, she saw it on every face, the recognition that their species had changed course forever. They had warned the galaxy, and the galaxy had listened. Later, in the quiet of her quarters, Arya allowed herself a single reflection. Humanity had never wanted dominion, only safety. But safety had required power, and power, once revealed, could never be hidden again. The words she had spoken to the alien fleet now echoed back to her, heavy with finality. This is not vengeance. This is order. She wondered what history would make of it. Would they be remembered as liberators, or as the birth of a new empire cloaked in calm words? Did it matter? The galaxy would bend, willingly or not. Humanity had drawn the line, and dared others to cross it. On the flagship of a broken empire, Admiral Saraxis sat alone in the observation deck, watching the quiet human fleet that now orbited what had once been his capital. They did not fire, did not parade. They simply waited, patient, inevitable. He whispered the thought that had consumed him since Caliban's reach, a truth he had refused to name until now. "They were never behind us," he said softly, claws curling against the glass. "They were waiting." And in that whisper, carried into silence, the galaxy shifted.